We're going to talk about what Putin's end game is. What is his strategy for this war? Why is he stringing the president along? Why is he pretending to care about ceasefire when he just keeps reneging on every offer? We're going to talk about all of that and more. But before we do that, let's talk about our sponsor.
Look, I work out hard because life is hard. And in my line of work, I might have to drag somebody's carcass off the battlefield with zero warning. And for the rest of us, the mission's just the same. We're all getting older. And after 60, your full-time job should be staving off decrepitude. So that's why I care about performance, not gym selfies, but real output. One lever that I've found that actually moves the needle on this is nitric oxide. Your body makes it to tell your blood vessels to open up and get oxygen and nutrients to your muscles and your brain when you need them. The problem is those levels drop fast with age. Some estimates say up to 85% by your 60s. That means that you press the gas, but the engine doesn't answer. So I swear by nitric oxide supplements in my workouts. If you want that edge without sugar or caffeine, go look at Blood Flow 7 from Juvenon. What's under their hood? S7 botanical complexes and nitrosogene, which ramps up your nitric oxide production, transresveratrol to support healthy blood flow, and bioperine, so your body actually absorbs the stuff instead of wasting it. Receipts matter. One study showed S7 alone boosted nitric oxide by 230% in 3 hours. Another showed transresveratrol helped open arteries by up to 62%. So just take 2 small capsules, no caffeine, no sugar, just performance support. If your routine's built for real life, not comfort, give Blood Flow 7 a look. Bloodflow7.com/hot. Over 5,000 5-star reviews and a 60-day risk-free guarantee. Go to bloodflow7.com/hot and train for the world as it is.
I personally think that America is less safe when we don't live up to our obligations and commitments to our allies across the globe. One of those major commitments the United States has made is to the North Atlantic Treaty Association. NATO exists essentially to keep a check on Russia. Well, Russia's made it pretty clear that they intend to control not just the satellite countries around their borders, not just Eastern Europe, not just Northern Asia, but all of Europe. And they don't show any signs of appearing to want to stop. They have been engaging in what the Institute for Study of War calls cognitive warfare, specifically in Europe and the United States. The bedrock of Russia's strategy, not their tactics, but their strategy for accomplishing their goals is to be able to direct the whims of the American voter away from the things that Russia doesn't want them to pay attention to and toward the things that Russia does want them to pay attention to. We're talking about massive server farms and SIM card farms that can blast out messages on social media. They've created, I would say, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of fake profiles claiming to be American based in Texas when really they're based in Moscow to propagandize the American people and the European people and to try to keep Europe from doing what needs to be done in order to allow Ukraine to defeat Russia in this war and get the war over with. You have to understand how Vladimir Putin thinks. His concern is not the economy of Russia, not the people of Russia. His concern is for Russia to be able to control all of the regions that currently he believes threaten Russia. Vladimir Putin, number one, wants to get the Soviet Union back together. They were much stronger economically in the heyday of the Soviet Union, for sure. To do that, if he has to lose 1 million or 5 million of his people in the war, so be it. And he's actually made statements to that effect just recently. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff went to Moscow. They got there yesterday and they had some meetings with their Russian counterparts. Now, here's a video of them going out to dinner at a Michelin 5. And they are walking the streets of Moscow there. Now, I just want to tell you how gross this is to me, because the United States should not be consorting with murderers. we shouldn't be whining and dining with those guys. We shouldn't be accepting their invitations to Michelin five-star restaurants in Moscow while there are innocent people being murdered by those same people in Ukraine. That's just my opinion. I just think that's a really bad look. And what it shows is that the United States is unreliable as a partner to all of our allies and our adversaries. So our allies are starting to come to that conclusion because they're starting to believe very much so that before too long, Russia will be at war kinetically with Eastern and Western Europe. NATO may be called upon to marshal its forces together and do something about it. Now, the real question is, what would the United States do in that situation? If the Russians invaded Finland, let's say, or Lithuania or Poland, and actually started sending troops in there, and those all being NATO countries, NATO would invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. And so we would be expected to respond in the same way we would respond as if Russia attacked the mainland of the United States. That's what we obligated ourselves to do when we became a part of NATO. Take a listen to a spokesman for the White House.
Putin has started making incursions into the NATO borders.
Exactly.
So the one thing I can tell you is the U.S. is not going to get involved with troops or any of that. We will sell the Europeans weapons.
So he's saying that we will sell the Europeans weapons, but we're not sending troops. Okay. And he's saying we'll sell them weapons. So we're saying we want to have no more leverage, no more say, no more impact on what happens between Russia and Western Europe than Brazil selling firearms to Europe, or Israel selling Iron Dome systems or Arrow systems to Germany. That's what we're saying. And now, this does not necessarily break our obligation to the NATO Charter. If they were to invoke Article 5, what Article 5 says is that we, in some form, doing nothing would violate the treaty. But the form of our response is up to us. So in practice, that response should almost certainly require the United States to send military forces and to send military aid, not to sell them. That relegates us to nothing but a merchant in this process. Now, no, I don't want to see our boys and girls going off to war any more than anybody else does. The thing about wars is that you don't get to choose when a war comes. We are a peaceable people in the United States. We don't start wars typically, but we have been called upon to finish wars from time to time. And those never came at the time of our choosing. We don't get to arrange when things like that happen. That's the situation that Europe is finding itself in, because up until about 15 minutes ago, the other NATO countries took it for granted that the United States military power would be on the table if they were ever attacked by Russia. That was just a foredrawn conclusion. It was just baked into the cake. But now they're starting to realize, hey, we might not be able to rely on the United States saying, hey, we'll sell you what you need. How about we sell you some blankets when you don't have any power anymore? What you're seeing in the EU is speeches like this one.
Drones did it take to shut down European skies? About 5. How many drones are over Ukraine? About 500 every night. If we face that, we're not prepared at all. Ukraine learned the hard way how to defend itself against drones, and they understand. You should not shoot down a cheap drone with €1 million missile. Their technology is cutting edge, and Ukrainian instructors are in the EU right now training European soldiers. Putin exploits our weakness and depletes our air defense on his terms. We've let a war criminal drag us into a boxing match and made him the referee. But if we stop being afraid to act, we can respond on our terms. Protect our skies, build the drone wall, stop buying Russian gas, give all the frozen Russian assets, and set up a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine. Colleagues, Ukraine is helping us, but we don't say thank you enough. So let me say it, Mr. Zelensky, thank you. And let's back our gratitude up with actions.
NATO is not prepared for a war with Russia. And not only that, but the cheapest, safest thing that Europe could do would be to fully enable Ukraine to defeat Russia on the battlefield so that they never have to go to war with NATO. Now, Vladimir Putin has been pretty belligerent. Every time there's a peace deal on the table, he basically goes back to, look, we want to take over the Donbass, and that includes Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. And at the rate that they're fighting, they're taking ground, it would take them a good 4 or 5 more years to take just the rest of Donbass. He believes that there's not a lot of impetus for him to accept a peace deal right now because he thinks he can direct President Trump. He can play President Trump and play them off of Europe, get them against each other, seeing each other as adversaries, not allies, and it's working. So even though he may be getting his head handed to him on the battlefield, he doesn't get the truth very often about what's actually happening on the front lines. What he does understand is that he has some sort of sway over President Trump and his administration. So he wants to take advantage of that to make gains on the battlefield, to negotiate further gains by getting Ukraine to give up land that they currently hold, that they have fought bitterly for. And these are all things that are non-starters for Ukraine. So really, there are no negotiations going on. The United States thinks we can go negotiate with the aggressor and we can talk it out with them. It's just not working. Vladimir Putin gave a speech the other day where he literally said, we are ready to fight to the last Ukrainian. We are ready to wipe out Ukraine. We are prepared to do that. Take a listen.
Will withdraw from the territories they currently occupy, and only then will hostilities cease. They won't leave. We will achieve this by armed means, and to continue military operations until the last Ukrainian. I have already publicly stated, in principle, we are ready for this.
Vladimir Putin made himself very clear there. He doesn't feel like there's any need for them to stop fighting. Now, I would say it's very likely that he's putting on a front, that he likely understands that his economy is in shambles. The Russian petroleum industry is getting wrecked every night by Ukrainian drones and missiles. The Druzhba pipeline being hit yesterday. The Druzhba pipeline is one of the largest pipeline systems in the world, can carry 2 million barrels of oil a day. And it goes from Russia into the stands, into Poland, into Hungary, Slovakia, spreads out all over the place. Ukraine has been striking pumping stations on the Druzhba pipeline from time to time. They hit it again last night. Have a video of the explosion there. They've been able to shut down oil through the Druzhba pipeline several times. When they do that, then Hungary and Slovakia go without heating oil. And that's one of the reasons why Hungary desperately supports Russia. And even though they're a NATO country, very much against everything that NATO is trying to do in terms of putting sanctions on Russia, taking their frozen assets, giving it to Ukraine, all of the things that would literally speed up this a just end to this war. All of that taking place, and Hungary is totally against it because they get all of their oil from Russia. Why would Russia risk flying drones over NATO countries, trying to gauge NATO response times, and looking like they're preparing for war with NATO? As a matter of fact, Russia is actually overhauling their entire military structure to get ready for a war with NATO. That's been reported by the ISW here recently. But why would they do that? If they're not able to take Ukraine, what makes them think they're going to take the rest of Europe? Russia also believes that NATO is not prepared for a war, although they're ramping up in many NATO countries right now. Poland, Germany, Finland are all beefing up their militaries. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they're all beefing up their militaries in preparation for future conflict. And they're starting to believe that it's almost inevitable that they're going to have to go to war with Russia. But why would Russia want to attack those places? Here's the thing. Right now, Ukraine enjoys a distinct advantage over Russia in that they can procure a lot of the weapons that they use on the front lines outside of Ukraine in areas that Russia is not at war with, and so therefore cannot bomb. They're able to send their troops to train outside of their country. What Ukraine does is they send their troops into Poland or Czech Republic or other places, and they do their training there, and then they come back into Ukraine to put it into practice. They're doing some very good training. they're also exchanging knowledge that they've gained on the front lines with the troops of their host country. And that's a distinct benefit to those host countries, preparing them for war with Russia. So Russia is stymied in striking the places that are making the ammunition or the weapons that are going into Ukraine. Now, Russia has something similar in the fact that they are the largest country on planet Earth. Now they're putting their bombers clear out in the eastern part of Russia. When they do bombing runs into Ukraine, they don't ever actually break into Ukrainian airspace because they'd get shot down in a heartbeat if they did that. But they get close enough to drop glide bombs or missiles from the planes into Ukraine. But those aircraft are now stationed so far away that it's a 6 to 8 hour flight for them to do those missions, and gives Ukraine much longer lead time because it's 6 to 8 hours from the time that these planes take off. Ukrainians can find out when they take off and alert their people to be ready. So it's a distinct disadvantage for Russia. And as Ukraine's reach gets longer and longer with their drones and missiles, these Flamingo missiles they're making, they have 1,000-mile range and a very big warhead. There's almost no place left in Russia that Ukraine cannot reach. And that doesn't even take into account the partisans who are working inside Russia to sabotage railway lines and pumping stations and military depots. And that is happening on a regular basis inside Russia as well. Ukraine has been so effective at striking at Russian critical infrastructure, especially in terms of their oil and natural gas, that the main oil company in Russia has seen its revenues drop by more than 70% this year. And that is a direct impact on the Russian government's ability to prosecute this war. There was a report in the Institute for Study of War that was talking about how Europe keeps shooting itself in the foot. If you want Russia to lose this war, if you want Ukraine to win, you're not doing the things that you need to do to allow it to win. And so Europe needs to stop undermining its own efforts. To deter and win future wars, the United States has got to be able to seize and maintain the initiative against our adversaries, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, anybody. And initiative is a very specific thing. It means being proactive. Wars are rarely won through reactive approaches. So the current problem that the United States has with Russia is that Russia has been very clearly on a trajectory to protract the war, to expand the war in Ukraine. And as long as the Kremlin believes that it holds the initiative here, it doesn't have any reason to compromise its aims in Ukraine, to reduce its attacks and the pressure and the cognitive warfare it's waging against Europe. It doesn't have any impetus to do that. And the only reason it doesn't have any impetus to do that is because the United States has been largely in reactive mode to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And we've allowed Russia to enjoy effective safe havens because the West restricted the range and capabilities of systems that we provided to Ukraine. So they couldn't strike deep into Russia. And they follow a policy of gradual pressure on Russia. They don't go whole hog. We're on our 18th round of sanctions. We should have done all 18 at once, and this war would have been over by now. Our half-step approach to assisting Ukraine has not gotten any better under President Trump. It's gotten worse. We've gone from half-stepping our aid to Ukraine to no aid to Ukraine. And we've stopped providing any money to Ukraine. And President Trump talked about it in a press conference.
We are not involved in the war monetarily anymore. Biden gave away $350 billion like it was candy. That's a massive amount of money.
Biden did not give away $350 billion. The United States pledged about $170 billion. We gave a little less than $100 billion to Ukraine. President Trump has a knack for exaggeration, and he's continued to exaggerate, and he's now at a completely made up number. There's no $300 billion that we've given to Ukraine. The majority of the money that was pledged to help end the war in Ukraine by assisting Ukraine, a lot of it didn't go to Ukraine. It went to support U.S. troops in Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, places like that. It went to loan guarantees for our NATO allies to get them to give their old weapons to Ukraine and buy new weapons from the United States. So that money really didn't even leave the United States yet. So he's just exaggerating in this case. Do you hear what he said there? We are no longer giving money to Ukraine. That's a double-edged sword. That's good for our pocketbook, and a lot of Americans are okay with that. But in so doing, we have given up our leverage over Ukraine. We've given up the ability to really make a difference in this war, to have a say in this war with Ukraine and Russia. And we've made it very much more likely that this war will drag on for years longer than necessary. What's required, if we want to reverse that, is a shift in our approach. No single measure is going to be decisive. The key here is momentum, a continuous series of actions that continue to increase the pressure into a tsunami against Russia. Stop with these incremental measures and start with massed cascading effects on Russia. The Kremlin's focus is explicitly designed to deny Western initiative, to keep the West from ramping up that pressure because we can't agree on anything. And it's been largely effective. They want to keep the West's response to the war reactive, fragmented. They want to ensure pressure comes as isolated measures instead of massed effects on Russia. Ukraine has been more effective than we have with sanctions. They're doing what they call petroleum sanctions, meaning they're striking Russia's petroleum and natural gas assets and taking them offline so that they can't sell any oil.
And much of it in cash, a lot of it in equipment. I don't give away anything. We sell the equipment to NATO. The European nations pay us for the equipment, 100% price. And then they bring it to Ukraine or whatever they do with it. But we're trying to get that settled. I've settled 8 wars. This would be the 9th.
When you take the initiative, what you do is you start to build momentum and maintain that initiative by overwhelming the opponent's ability to react. Ukraine is getting better and better at this. The US and our partners have prevented Russia from taking more Ukrainian territory and possibly taking over Ukraine outright. We've shown that the West can contest Russia globally, but several patterns undermine those initiatives. First of all, the United States right now under President Trump is just very badly misreading the situation and the true intentions of Vladimir Putin. Russia has been consistent for the last 25 years, pursuing the same strategic aim, which is to take geopolitical control over all of Europe. And they've become progressively more extreme at that. And the West mostly reacted with limited countermeasures that really didn't have much effect. The sanctions that we have, as I said, are easy for Russia to get around in many ways. For example, on technology, we have sanctions that won't allow anybody to sell computer chips to Russia. So what happens is they get purchased by Armenia or Kazakhstan or something like that, and then get sold to Russia. So they just go around the sanctions. Our military aid has not been consistent and not been enough to really give Ukraine what they need to win the war. Ukraine has been making the best of what they have and getting more and more independent, less dependent on the West. What we need to do is let's go for some game changers here. Let's start focusing on, if I was advising President Trump, I'd say, look, the fastest way to get this war over is to make it so that Russia is not able to continue fighting. We also are degrading their military on the battlefield to the point that they won't be much of a threat to us in the future. And if we double down on assisting Ukraine militarily, that would very quickly degrade Russia's military to the point where they're just an afterthought. Taking the handcuffs off, allowing them to strike as far into Russia as they can with American supplied weapons if necessary, and making it so that Russia can't make money on their oil by continuing to put downward pressure on the price of oil, which we have the ability to do. So let's focus on doing the incremental things we need to do to make that pressure continue to squeeze Russia to the point where they just can't go any further. And that's closer than you think. We have the ability to do that in the next 6 months if we really put our minds to it. We could easily end this war in a matter of months. War doesn't have to go on for another several years. But if we don't do this, it will.